About 10 years ago, a study out of the University of Minnesota Carlson School identified the Twin Cities as a premier headquarters economy. High concentration of headquarters here. You know, we've got a number of them. And fueled by strong talent retention, that once people move here, they tend to not want to leave. Well, now comes an update to that research showing that retention remains strong. Maybe some other potential problems are rising that could change that or challenge it. So let's bring in Miles Shaver, the professor at the Carlson School, author of this research. Miles, thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Now let's talk about this before we get to the new update here, what you did 10 years ago to look at the headquarters economy. What was the purpose of that research a decade ago?
Yeah, so I like to start this discussion with the disclaimer, I'm not a native Minnesotan.
Okay.
And so having moved here, from elsewhere, lots of people wonder why you would move to Minnesota, and there are very personal reasons. I'm not a native Minnesotan, but my wife is. But being a business school professor, I tell people this is an amazing economy. It's a great place to be a business school professor. And most people are puzzled. The big companies that we relate and we know they're homegrown, like 3M or Target or Best Buy or that, most people don't relate as Minnesota companies. So there's always this question of why there? And the motivation was really the research. Why do we have so many big corporate headquarters? We benefit greatly for it, but what drives it? So that's what started it all.
Yeah, and medical headquarters as well, with medical device headquarters. Quite a few when you really go down the list, quite a few.
Oh, it's amazing, and they're amazingly diverse. So like you say, I mean, companies we relate to like Medtronic or US Bank or Cargill or General Mills, I have to admit, I had a lot of puzzled looks when I would name these companies, and people are like, what, they're all from Minnesota?
And so you were really looking at 10 years ago, what drives the fact that this is such a rich economic environment for all these headquarters that people weren't even aware were necessarily here. And again, it's the fact that once you got workers to come here, they wanted to stay, and that sort of then maintained this as a hotbed of headquarters.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And the story is really we have this talent base, and especially a talent base of people, who are professionals, professionally know how to run companies. And what distinguishes our region from many others is, yeah, we have not only this high concentration, but the way in which they move in and out of the region look different than every other major metro in the country. And as you've alluded to, we actually have a hard time attracting people here, but once they're here, they stay. They move between these companies. They share management practices. They make all these companies stronger. They sort of raise all boats, and that helps our economy. And a lot of that is being especially driven by the fact that once this talent gets here, they don't want to leave.
Yeah, which is good for the state's economy. Now,
Well,
go ahead.
no, sorry, absolutely. And the state's economy, and then many of the benefits that we all, feel and enjoy of living in the state.
Yeah. So now let's talk about the research that you just now have released, an update to this 10 years later. Were you looking at many of the same factors to see essentially if any of your original conclusions had changed?
That's exactly the reason why. So, especially in the last few years, I talked to people and they'd ask, does this still hold? We've had a pandemic. We have remote work like we've never had before, and that's important for headquarters. We've had social unrest in the region. And let's not forget, we've moved at least half a generation into the workforce. So, Gen X, Gen Z, they could be different. So we really approached it. This is an open question. Is it going to be the same? And, the big, sort of the main takeaway, it is shockingly similar in terms of people wanting to stay here as it was 10 years ago.
But you had also raised a couple of questions that you believe corporate leaders, other business leaders need to really be paying attention to. let's get to that here. That some of the ratings have dropped. That
Yeah.
some of the things that you identified as strong, quality of life, other issues, a high percentage of dual income households, and at least one of the spouse has some flexibility, and that is attractive. But there are concerns here in your study about, will the economy remain strong? Is the cost of living too high? Are the public schools not good enough? List some of these things that you discovered.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so, just to take half a step back, the reason that people want to stay here really comes to these of life dimensions. And previously, and in this, we reaffirmed, what are the real important ones? And one of the questions we ask people is, how do you think the Twin Cities compares to other regions where you could live? And this comparison that we're doing really well actually, retreated on a number of dimensions. Those were strength of the local economy, favorable cost of living, good quality public schools, good place to raise children. Overall, they're still strong, but we're seeing people thinking we're not doing the same job that we were doing 10 years ago on these dimensions.
So what does that mean as you present this and as Twin Cities business leaders read this report? I mean, what do you take away from that?
Yeah, so what I take away from that is, the good news is we haven't seen it bear out with people leaving on droves. They still want to stay here. But this is an early warning sign that many of the dimensions that they consider most important, they're questioning like they didn't before. And I think, especially on the, when it comes to policy and that, the two underlying questions for me that, that I'm seeing now that people are asking themselves are, do we invest in the economy and businesses like we used to? And do we invest in, public goods, things that we all benefit from, like, road infrastructure or good quality public schools or post-secondary education? They're questioning that. And I think that's important because there's always been this implicit contract, I feel, in Minnesota that we're willing to pay high taxes if we get these amenities that help us out overall. And we're beginning to see hints that people are questioning that are we seeing the investments that we expect to go along with these higher taxes?
Yeah, I think for decades you've seen Minnesota with a higher tax rate. But people make that argument that it is reflected in the world around us that we're living in. So yes, we stay and we pay the higher taxes because look at the quality of the roads or the parks or the schools, et cetera. So if you then hypothetically do this study again a decade from now, I guess you have no idea, if any of these things could change. But I mean, if you do this again in 10 years, what might happen?
Well, I mean, so I would hope they change and that we turn this around. I think, for me, one of the reasons for drawing attention to this is this general notion, and you just reported job reports and that, but this general notion that different states, different countries around the world, quite frankly, are in a race or a competition to attract talent, the best minds because they grow their economies, they make the society better, that if we don't step up, others are stepping up and looking to attract the talent. And a lot of the talent that resides here, I know lots of other states and development agencies I've talked to, it's like, well, they'd love to have everybody move to their place.
Yeah, that the retention numbers may go down, or maybe they wouldn't even relocate here to begin with.
And that's a concern. Yeah. I mean, we always, quite frankly, the data shows we struggle at attraction, but it's been retention that's really driven this economy.
Yeah. All right. Miles Shaver at the U of M Carlson School, thanks for the time today. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right.